Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering Sex Education, Season 4, Episode 6. In this episode, we have got Maeve's mother's funeral, which is just as loaded and uncomfortable a situation as you would expect. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everyone. I am Natasha. Thank you very much to Ashleigh for commissioning this episode. Ashleigh is here in the chat hanging out with me. Oh, and so is Ms. T. Hey. So, kids, I'm going to be honest. I'm kind of relieved this is my first recording today. Because honestly, this episode bummed me out. And I'm glad that I'm going to get to talk about it and then put it behind me. I have felt like the first two episodes of this show were nailing it, writing-wise. But this and the last episode are kind of beginning to miss for me. And I'm worried about it, but I'm trying to, bear with it and see if this is just part of the evolution of some of our characters. And there have been times where I've sort of felt this way, and looking back, they never resolved the thing, and I still kind of hold a grudge, and there was a clear misstep. And then there have been times where it was obvious that I was meant to feel the way I felt, and then they coped with that in a way that felt they were addressing it, and it wasn't just sort of either ineptitude or misjudgment on behalf of the writers. This was supposed to be like a character flaw. So it can be hard in the moment to know which is which. And I feel like in some ways what I'm really having a hard time with is Eric's exploration of his faith. And I really want to be real with you guys that I can't tell if part of my issue with this is my lack of connection to Christianity, and so there's just a sort of gap between us that we can't bridge and that I will not understand, or if this is being done in a way that's extremely, it feels like they're kind of dropping a major plot line that, not dropping it, they are shoehorning in a plot line and making it major in a way that that doesn't feel natural. I'm really curious what you guys all felt about this storyline. Because this episode, I watched initially right after the previous recording. I actually put it on in between recordings because I was so eager to find out what happens. And I just saw the opening scene, and my immediate reaction was, what is this? And I knew when I went back and rewatched this with Owen, he was going to really feel a way about it. Because Owen, we were both brought up in households where there was a strong push for us to convert to Christianity. But I was very lucky in that I had my mother, who was a pagan and really understood my lack of interest and offered a safe place to talk about how little that resonated with me. Owen didn't have that. He had parents who were Christian who neglected him, and then he was essentially adopted by grandparents who are very, very, active in their church and still try and convince him to come to things at the church as if his, lapse in attendance is just a temporary thing rather than, the choice that he has made for himself as an adult. He's mid-30s now, and they still act as if it's just, a phase. So this episode, they go into a dream sequence connected to straight up premonition stuff. And I really want to know who thought this was a good idea. It's one thing if you have something here and there it's another when you start the episode with a visit from God, and it just felt so hackneyed to me. It wasn't even just, oh, it's God. It was like a black woman joking about how you didn't expect an old white guy. We have had that joke so many times in media in general, first of all. Tired joke. Secondly, Eric literally has a portrait of Black Jesus on his wall in his bedroom, so we know at the very least that white was not on the menu in Eric's mind. It just felt like the kind of joke that came out of like 1998 to me. And for it to be a direct conversation with God, in my mind, if what you're attempting to show with Eric is his confusion surrounding his faith and his feelings of inner conflict, having a dream conversation with God, there is no way to continue a story about his confusion with his faith, because you basically gave him a vision from the beyond. That is as close as any of us are ever likely to get to something that confirms our faith beyond a doubt. And I'm putting beyond a doubt in quotes because people who don't believe would absolutely think it's just a dream. But if you believe and are having doubts and you have a dream like this, come on. That's a fucking period at the end of that sentence. You have faith now. It is a guarantee that you begin to believe, especially followed up with the fact that several of the things in the dream came true. So it felt so much to me like the point behind Eric having this struggle this season was because he was finding a way forward for himself that he felt comfortable with in what he felt was maybe having to compromise sharing the reality about who he is with the faith that means a lot to him and a community that means a lot to him. And if you're just going to basically hand him a direct order from God to go to church and do things again, in my view, that absolutely eliminates any faith quandary storyline. You have given him a complete answer that if he told anybody at his church, they would see as God literally told you what to do here. I don't feel like this is a great approach because it's not what most people are going to experience. And so what I wanted from his story was somebody who is like queer and has a church that has been homophobic, and sometimes over time a church can evolve on that front. You know, it's not, people are as fluid as, like, the church is as fluid as the people making it up. And a lot of our 20 years ago members of certain churches felt a very different way about homosexuality than they do today. And so the church really will reflect that over time. And so if he's like exploring that, whether they are comfortable, and if they're not, what does that mean for him? And how can he continue to be authentic to himself while also like worshiping and honoring this God that means a lot to him? I wanted to see this be something that he went through in a way that would be very relatable to other like queer youth who are coping with the same exact sort of issue. And I find it really disappointing that they decided to go this route and have it be almost a cartoon of this over the top series of coincidences. Like, you know, we had the Bible standing in the middle of the road. I thought those couple things were a perfect balance of just weird enough to feel like it means something, but also they have a completely, you know, there's a rational explanation for them. And now we're getting into this, and I feel like it was a different show. The whole opening sequence felt like I was watching something else. It felt like bad fan fiction something that was sort of near what you're looking for, but just the flavor's wrong. So I'm just, there's the person that is God in this episode for him too is the woman that he saw on the side of the road. She had asked him for directions to the soup kitchen, and then when he tries to just tell her, go this way, I don't have time, she grabs his arm and drags him away. And at the time I said something like, basically, she's probably magic. And I'm not saying that she was God, because it's certainly possible that for the sake of his dream, she sort of wedged herself in his mind, and so she became the avatar for God in his head because of her association with what had happened that day. It certainly could be like just solely on his end in the way that he, his brain interpreted things in a magical realism type way. However, I really enjoyed there being this one character who had seemed to grab him and be like, you have time to show me where it is. And leaving it there, like, I thought that was going to be potentially she would come back again. But every time she came back, she would be instrumental in real life. And you would never really know who she was, where she came from. And there would always be that question about whether she was like real or not. And that was as far as I was willing to accept in terms of the magical realism thing. Even that, as cute as that can be, felt a little bit too easy. So now that we've gotten here with this dream, and it's so funny, he wakes up and he's like, what the fuck? And the only part that I can say what the fuck along with him is that Cal is there holding a basket of bread, asking if he wants any, which I'm assuming has to do with the food kitchen thing. But I really what the fuck isn't the response that I would have if I woke up from a dream where I had had a conversation with God. I would have woken up and been like, oh my God, okay, I hear you, oh my God. Well, so anyway, I just want to be clear here about why I'm coming at this way, because as much as I recognize that I have difficulties with my own relationship with Christianity, I was actually sort of interested in the way this was going. And I feel like they fucking squashed that interest, and I'm bummed about it. I'm just really disappointed. Ashleigh says, yeah, no, up until this point, I've been okay with his struggles with his religion, but I do feel like they kind of go too far with it. Although, to be honest, I don't know if I told you this before, but probably relevant for the last couple episodes, they had no idea when filming that this was going to be the last season. I think COVID really affected it. So I think to a certain extent, they were opening up things that we're going to explore more in the future. And worse, there are a couple they accidentally dropped entirely, meaning to be cliffhangery. Oh my God. Oh, that's going to be real tough. Man, this is the sort of thing that I really wish. I know that there's like all kinds of laws surrounding why you can't do this unless you make a deal and everything. But I really wish that the people who were involved could just go ahead and just write a script out real quick and just be like, so this is what we were thinking of doing. And I know that's just asking them to basically work for free. But, just drop some tweets. We were going to do this and that, Miss T says, it's me, God, didn't work for me either. But just because they basically did, yep, God is real, I guess, doesn't take away the church community family plus queer dramatic tension. It just takes away the, quote, does Eric really believe in God, unquote, question. It does, for me, it does take away from the church community family queer dramatic tension a little bit. Because basically the conversation with God was, I don't want to be baptized. It's so hard. I sin all the time. And God just saying the world needs you. And we have to make sacrifices to that, which I felt like was sort of a weird message. It felt like saying it's your responsibility to put yourself through the potential trauma of being rejected by a community that you care about, because that's the only way to involve yourself in making the world a better place. And it just felt to me, again, like just an answer. Like, he's asking, should I be baptized? He's working in the food bank, or not food bank, oh my God, soup kitchen. He's doing stuff with the church, but the fully committing to baptism is something that he has been really unsure about. And God literally tells him what to do and why. So that's for me, like the queer dramatic tension surrounding the community thing. It's just answered that this is what God wants from you. And I don't want that simple answer. I want Eric to figure out, is this what I want? Do these people understand me at least enough for me to feel like I can be part of myself and work my way up to being completely myself? Like, it just seems like he's being given orders, and I understand that he doesn't have to act on this. It was a dream, right? But knowing where he's coming from, if I were him, I would feel like it was direct orders. And it would sort of feel like, in some ways, the option was like being denied me. So I just think this was a mistake. I really do. I don't think this was done well. I felt like the scene was really, like I said, it was hackneyed. It was so like beating you over the head. I felt like we had teetered right on the edge of what was cool last episode, and I couldn't believe that they went that one step further. It just fucking completely flattened out a storyline that I have found nuanced and interesting. So, you know, it's too bad that they didn't realize that there was going to be another season, because, or there wasn't going to be another season, because I really would have, I wish they had renewed it. I would have liked to see, if they were going to continue this in a fashion, what that would look like. I don't think that they've been terrible about handling it for the most part. It just seemed, you know, I think a couple episodes ago I said, I want to be more invested in his like crisis of faith, but I just haven't felt the presence of the church in his life enough to see how much it means to him. So this alleged, like, but they're your family, that, as much as I can tell I'm supposed to believe it, didn't resonate for me, just because I hadn't really seen that, you know? And I stand by that. But that was a different sort of, maybe misstep isn't even the right word. It might have just been that they didn't intend to explore this aspect of Eric's life so much, and they didn't set the framework up because they weren't intending to go down this road. And that's fine. I'm willing to accept that. This is a different thing. This is just so incredibly ham-fisted. So Ashleigh says, yeah, I rarely enjoy when God is brought into things as an actual character. It's rarely done well, in my opinion. Highly agree. And it's always, like, difficult because you have got... It makes me think of something that Owen said one time when we were watching... I think we were watching Bones. And there's a character played in the early seasons by Stephen Fry who comes back, like, way at the end of the series. And he is meant to be this sort of, like, genius psychiatrist. And he's got these lines that are very, like, iffy, you know. And at one point, Owen said, God, there is nothing as painful as a super smart character written by not super smart people. And I feel like that applies to God characters as well. You have got regular ass people trying to write a character who is supposed to be like beyond our understanding. And that is always going to be a really, really tricky proposition in the best of times with the best writers. And if you've just got, like, you know, sort of average writers, like most shows, I would say Sex Education has very above average writers, which is part of why I'm so puzzled by this choice, you know. But anyway, so yeah, this just did not work for me. And like I said, there's a bunch of like little moments throughout the episode where things that were in the dream pop up in real life. And Eric is just getting sort of spooked by it. And I feel like that even goes extra far in kind of ruining this crisis of faith. Because if it had been a dream and he talked to God, then that is already more than most of us get. But it's a dream where he talked to God and then things from the dream happen in life, thus confirming that that dream was God. You know, like, to me, it's just, what are you doing then? What kind of conflict can there be about whether he believes in God after doing something like this? I have a hard time believing anybody would be able to just walk away, even if they were like starting off as an atheist, that it would be difficult to explain away some of this. And then you've got somebody who already had a tendency towards believing, and you give them this, and that's just a wrap to me, you know? So the other thing, though, I will say this, because there's a conversation ongoing with Eric and Otis. And you guys, I was so happy with this because it's not just Eric. Ruby also decides that she is going to draw a fucking line and be like, no, you know what? Fuck you. So Eric he had said something earlier in the episode to Otis about like, are we okay? You know, with the fact that I think it was last episode. I'm so sorry that like I didn't, the whole thing with uninviting you, and Otis insisted that it was okay, but then he like brings it up again. And we get to this point where Eric asks Otis, can you tell me one thing that's going on in my life right now? And Otis says, you're going back to church. And he's like, oh my God, no, I'm not. And there was something about not only Otis not being able to answer the question, but the fact that Eric has had this really incredible dream and all of these things happening in real life. And if Otis were like more aware of his friend, maybe Eric would feel okay telling him, oh, dude, this was in my dream. What is happening right now? Eric doesn't tell him anything, which I don't blame him for a second. And thus, every time this happens, it's just sort of him sitting there like freaking out. And I felt really bad about that. And I'm not sure if he ever would have told Otis, because as he points out later, there's a lot that we don't have in common. And me being a Christian is one of those things. I really love the fact that eventually he's like, there are just things we don't talk about. And he says, like me being a Christian, like the fact that your family has more money than mine, like we never talk about race. And I really appreciated that being mentioned. It's not something that I have like, it has not occurred to me, them having a conversation about race, because the issue of race comes up so infrequently in the show in general that I just basically accepted their focus is going to be much more on sexual issues. And while those can be intrinsically linked with race as well, it felt like they were doing a lot more of the sex education thing and not wanting to talk about like the societal aspects as much. So it didn't bother me as a viewer too bad that they didn't talk about it, but I did like Eric bringing it up. And the fact that Otis responds with, why are you blaming me for that? I keep having to remind myself how young these characters are meant to be, because it's just, I get it. I really do. Why you would react this way. And I think if you are a white, straight, cis, thin person, any of those things, able-bodied, whatever it may be, you have a privilege of some kind, and you have had somebody tell you that you don't get it, whatever it is that they don't have that privilege on, If you tell me that you have never reacted badly to that, I will call you a liar. I will straight to your face, because I know I have. And it has happened a lot of times, and I have had to step back and really think about myself a couple times. Like, I look back at some interactions that I had with Black women whose space I was in for whatever reason. And, you know, there were some things that I was taking issue with that were valid and were a completely separate conversation. But I look at the way that I like interacted with certain things or conversations, or generally just like inserted myself into a conversation that was just so not about me, and got told, go sit down. What are you doing here? We do not want you here. This is not about you. And I did not care for it. And I was not cute about it. And I really like look back and cringe. But that's the point. Like, if you don't look back and cringe at yourself, you're not growing. So I embrace that cringe and acknowledge it as like, I'll probably cringe about myself today, you know, in 10 years. But I really want to examine my reaction toward Otis of just being like, dude, no. And how impatient I was with him. And really stop and consider the fact that I have been him more than once, and that in the context of the show, we haven't seen them talk about any of these things. Eric is right, which means that them being brought up the way that Eric is here would probably freak Otis out, because they haven't touched on these things, and he didn't know they were an issue that needed to be discussed, because when you have that kind of privilege, it doesn't occur to you. And so Eric listing several things about himself that he doesn't have in common with Otis and that Otis might not get, it probably blindsided Otis to realize that my friend has been thinking these things for a while, and I thought we were totally on the same page, and coming to realize that there was a very different internal monologue going on sometimes than what I was having. And it can be very jarring, and like there's a threatening feeling to that, you know? So I'm not saying Otis is in the right for how he reacted. I am trying to say we have all been there in one way or another. And we've got to remember that when we see other people reacting this way in like a knee-jerk sense. I want Otis to take some time, and I think them spending time apart is honestly the best answer. And I think combined with the fact that Ruby basically tells Otis, go fuck yourself, because he comes to talk to her and she's thinking that he like just wants to be friends and spend some time like chatting, even though I know she cares about him still and she would like it to be more. I don't think she is the type to push for that or try and sabotage things with him and Maeve or anything. But for him to then basically admit, like, I wanted to do damage control on my relationship and I wanted your help with the damage control with O, he is going to her only for what she can do for him. And that fucking sucks. And between both her and Eric being like, you know what, fuck you, I really hope this is going to be a bit of a brainwave for Otis, that he is going to step back and be like, okay, more than one person in my life has basically decided they don't want anything to do with me. And they were some of my closest people at one time. Wait a second. Because talk about shit I have done before. Been a bad friend. Real bad, guys. Like, so and not aware in the moment at all. Looking back, I can see. But this is how you begin to realize you done fucked up. And there are times where, you know, there were other reasons why I didn't have friendships that lasted a long time, because I moved around a lot and I was involved in really different, like, social circles depending on where I was working and what was going on in my personal life at the time. But there were a few times where friends cut me off and I never heard from them again. And I look back and I'm just sort of like, oh, okay. I was just not there for this person. And at the time, they could have told me, we could have had a conversation about it, and maybe it would have still ended, but I would know a little bit better why. But in truth, there are times where somebody just doesn't owe you an explanation. Sometimes if they have attempted to reach out and you haven't really delivered, it's almost like you don't notice that friend has stopped getting in contact until something like this with Ruby, where you need something from them. And then you go to reach out and realize, I haven't talked to them except for this. And I didn't even notice that they had stopped texting me first. And you realize, wow, I was not good. This was actually really, really shitty of me. I think that you can reach out and make that up to people. It's up to that person whether they want to hear you out. They are under no obligation. I don't think anybody ever owes anybody else that kind of forgiveness. It's an option that they can or cannot take. But I do think that looking back on relationships and seeing how more than one person reacted to you in a similar way may indicate that is something you need to work on. It may not. It may be that you tend to attract people who are gaslighters or toxic and tell you untrue things about yourself because you keep being drawn back to that type of personality. But I think usually Occam's razor, maybe you get told a thing about yourself more than once because that's true about you. And it's not always the easiest fucking pill to swallow. But honestly, Otis has been like this since the first season, and he has ditched out on Eric kind of a lot. And I loved Eric pointing it out, and immediately Otis trying to say Maeve's mom. And Eric is this is not the first time, dude. And literally they're in the middle of the conversation when Maeve calls and Otis tells Eric to stop. Does he even think about not picking up? No. And, granted, they're heading to her mother's funeral. I get it. But he's in the middle of telling you, literally in that moment, that you always choose Maeve. And here you're doing it in the conversation itself. I don't know what more fucking evidence you need, Otis, dude. You could just, wait until this conversation's done and immediately call her or text her back, there are options for how you could handle this. And he just isn't seeing the evidence in front of him. I mean, he has alienated most people in his life, except for Maeve, by the end of this episode. He is yelling at his mother for hiring O. Why? Somebody tell me, please. Why doesn't Jean explain she didn't pick O? Does she ever say that? I don't feel like she said that in the last episode. I don't feel like she said that in this episode, that it's not her choice, that O was thrust upon her and then they made her a regular even though Jean asked them not to. I mean, she could at least say this, but she doesn't. I don't know if it's supposed to be that she's unwilling to foist off responsibility because she knows that she could have quit the job, if that's the concern here or what. But I really wanted her to kind of give him a slap in the face, because all he can think about is the fact that she's doing this to him, and she says, it's my job to look out for you and worry about you. And he's like, well, you weren't worried about me when you hired blank, blank, blank. And she didn't, dude. She didn't. So anyway, this conversation with his mom and throwing this in his face, and then fighting with Eric, and then alienating Ruby. The only person by the end of this episode that things were okay with was Maeve. And even that wasn't great, because they were trying to have sex and he had a panic attack again, which I thought was interesting because he was able to fuck Ruby a lot and he didn't have this kind of panic attack. And it seems pretty clear to me that his issue has been sex ruins things, and that he's really worried about whether or not he's going to lose Maeve, that having sex with her is going to somehow change the relationship, and that there's going to be I don't know, regret or perhaps like he won't be able to perform well enough, or that Maeve has more experience than him and maybe he's threatened by that. Whatever it is, it's fundamentally related to him thinking somehow having sex with her is going to ruin things. And I think that's an interesting thing that it's happening with Maeve and it didn't happen with Ruby, because there is so much tied around Maeve and the expectations of that. And this can really happen if you have been like into somebody for a while and you finally are going to have sex and it's been like a long time coming. You can put way too much pressure on that situation. And it's like really rare that people having sex for the first time are going to be able to like connect so well that it lives up to what you had imagined. So I don't know if that might be as simple as that, performance anxiety. But that's why I kind of said okay with Maeve, because like it's okay in that she says like, let's just cuddle. And he says it's been a weird day. And they are in the same room and she has forgiven him for Ruby. I'm putting forgiven him in quotes. I will reiterate, I don't see why what happened with Ruby is something that he needs to be forgiven for. Like, he says, I know I fucked up. And I'm like, I mean, I guess. I don't know. You're working closely because of this thing. You were at her house. I don't know, man. Is this a fuck up? Like, do you guys consider it something that he needs to apologize for? I don't know. Maybe. Whatever. But anyway, the way things end with the two of them, I think she is clearly not opening up with him. She hasn't told him about the professor and the way that he reacted to her work. She hasn't told him the real reasons why she's thinking about not going back. She tells him it's because she wants to be here with him. And it's not really true. She's framing it in a way that will keep him from being like asking too many questions about it, because it's flattering and it's considering how afraid he has been that she won't come back. Probably exactly what he wants to hear in some ways. So she's choosing to like put a spin on it. But what's really going on is that she suffered a terrible rejection from a authority figure in their field. And now she's afraid. And the fact that she doesn't feel like she can open up to him about it, in my opinion, means they shouldn't have sex. Until she can tell him everything, that's a complete no, because the sex between the two of them is going to mean enough, to him at least, that they need to be able to be completely vulnerable and honest. So, I don't know, maybe there's a part of him that can sense she isn't being. And that the sex scene here kind of started as a means of distracting him from asking any more questions. Like, maybe he realizes that she's sort of using him as an escape, and that isn't awesome. I don't know. But anyway, so all that's... I'm going to back up again here and talk about Maeve herself. And the first scene we see is her trying on a funeral dress. A very like Sabrina, in Netflix Sabrina kind of dress. And her and Amy have a moment. And again, y'all, Eric was the primary issue I had. His storyline. But this is like one of several issues I'm beginning to consistently have here. Feeling like I don't see why Otis needs to apologize about Ruby, or that was that big a deal. We then have the sex injury that Maeve sustained, and her saying to Amy, I wanted to text you about it, but... And Amy saying, I understand that we aren't in a good place right now. Are you do? Like, I didn't think that was true at all. I thought Amy asked her this thing and she was like, I can't cope with that right now. And Amy was like, that's fine, you know, and I'm here. And she continued to do other stuff. And I didn't think that meant that things weren't good between them. And I kind of find it fucked up. That's like, she did the right thing and asked about this guy that she can't help having feelings for. The fact that it's like, oh, that makes things bad between you two just seems like so unfair. She did what she needed, and you're giving her an answer that she is respecting. Why is she being punished? I don't know. And then Maeve saying, I feel really uncomfortable about the whole Isaac thing. Can you guys just be friends? And again, I don't get this, because I don't feel like the two of them were together long enough or seriously enough that this should be any issue. And to me, if it is, that indicates that she might still have feelings for him on some level. I just felt like the whole thing between Maeve and Amy and Maeve and Otis was super contrived and manufactured, where we don't want these two characters to have actually done anything wrong, because we don't want to lose the sympathy of the viewer, but we want there to feel like there's some actual tension that causes a rift that will, you know, add some drama. And unfortunately, I didn't even realize that these issues were big enough that there should be that much drama there, as apparently I was expected to believe. So to me, it's just a non-issue. You almost hooked up with this guy. He was correct in the fact that you couldn't choose between him and Otis, which meant that he didn't want to be with you. And now a friend who's going to school with him when you only see them how often? Because you've been gone and you're likely going to leave again, even though you're saying you're not. You don't feel comfortable, even though they're seeing each other constantly and you are almost never going to be there. Just kind of get over yourself. It isn't always about you. And honestly, there comes a point when it's a certain kind of situation where I feel like a person asking is really a gesture that shouldn't even be expected. And in this situation, or not even accepted, but that they don't need your permission. If she had really been with Isaac for any substantial length of time, and it was an official thing, then yes, I feel Amy would need her permission. But it's just been some kissing and hangouts, and I don't know, maybe it's just the fact that they spent so much time together before they hooked up, and so she feels like that counts towards overall their relationship. Because I guess Maeve was spending a lot of time at Isaac's place when her mother was fucking up. So I think because I didn't actually see a lot of that, I it was mentioned and we would see Maeve leaving their house and stuff, but it didn't feel like a relationship yet. I just don't feel like she's being fair. And I'm really surprised that she gets to tell Amy no. I just don't feel like she should get to do that. So anyway, let me go to the actual funeral. And there is this woman, and I know this actress from things, but I don't remember what. But she is their celebrant. And I have never had to set up a funeral. I'm very lucky that way. But kids, this seems so bleak. I know that setting up a funeral is always a nightmare. Everything is really expensive. You've got a ton of coordinating to do. You've got to deal with all different institutions that might not function well together if it's not a sort of all-in-one situation. You've got to deal with family coming and what they want and demands and, and so it's never a good time. But I do think that you can have a funeral that feels like that was healing. I got to see people. We did get to celebrate this person. And then there's this, where there's a woman getting Erin's name wrong more than once. She calls her Erica or something the first time, or Ellen, and then later on she says Willie instead of Wiley, and tries to argue with Maeve about how it's pronounced like it's not Maeve's fucking name. It's grim, and she has all of these platitudes about how there's a brand new extra bright star in the sky tonight, or she had 2 children and it wasn't always easy, but she always rose to the occasion, which is just flat out false. And I really don't think I don't know what kind of information Maeve had about how this was going to go, but if I were organizing this, I would just tell this person to, like, I would do the general speech about who she was, where she came from, all of that. And I wouldn't want them to be invented because they don't know this person. So where are they even getting this, Ashleigh says, this was an unexpectedly triggering episode for me today. A relative of mine who has struggled with heroin addiction all the time that I've known them passed away a couple of days ago, and I wasn't particularly close to her, given how much of my life she was in prison, but it still hit a particular nerve with me, to be honest. I'm sorry, Ashleigh, for your loss, even though you weren't close. Like, I know what you mean. And when something is, like, super, super immediately relevant, or sometimes I've reacted pretty hard to the deaths of people I haven't really known very well because I didn't think about the place they occupied in my mind. And so when they're suddenly gone, there was a podcast listener named Mary. I'm getting choked up just talking about her. I met her when Rashawn and I went to Florida the first time, and she was fantastic. Hilariously funny, warm-hearted, super generous, just a light, one of those people. And about a month after the trip, we found out, or not even, I think it might have been longer than that, but it doesn't matter. We found out that she had taken her own life. And it was one of those things where we weren't like even in the loop enough for anybody to tell us. Rashawn just realized she hadn't heard from her in a while and went to her page and saw all of these people. And it was just a moment of like, oh my God, this person that, and a podcast co-host, like from way back, she died really suddenly. And I had all these plans that like kind of included her in a tertiary sort of way. And to suddenly be like, oh, wait, she's just gone. Like, death is bizarre. It throws you for a loop in ways that you just don't expect. And people that you didn't realize like mean something, them suddenly vanishing and not being a presence, even in conversations or the background of your family tree, it can be unmooring because even though they weren't a huge presence, they still were like significant in a way. Somebody that you talked or thought about a lot, But yeah, that makes sense that it would be. And what's up with Maeve's like mother? And this is such a really beautifully done episode, in my opinion, in this respect, was that coping with a person who has done a lot of harm and that you still cared about. And you don't know how to like square that circle, Like I had said earlier, Owen's parents basically like abandoned him. They just completely neglected him to the point that he was on the verge of being taken away from them when his grandparents stepped in. And his father died a couple of years ago. It was a COVID-related issue. And he had really complicated feelings because as much as somebody didn't live up to what they should have as a parent, and they weren't there for you like you wanted and needed, and in some ways betrayed you, there are always going to be moments that were good. There are always going to be these memories that are kind of bright, and it can be tempting to want to make people either a person you remember fondly or someone you don't remember fondly. Straight up, one or the other. And it's so rare for a person to only fall into like one of those two categories. You have to deal with really complicated feelings. And it was hard for me navigating it as his wife because I hated his father. And that's a privilege that you get to have as somebody like connected to the person who was harmed, is you get to like keep holding the grudge on their behalf that they feel obligated to give up a little bit because they want to be forgiving because they love this person. I did not ever love him and I felt no obligation to love him. So I got to just hate him because he fucked Owen up and was a bad husband and father. And he did some permanent damage to Owen that he did not deserve. He was a child that he's still coping with. So I wanted to go into this whole thing as, oh, good, he's dead. And, you know, I know very well I can't have that fucking attitude. But I knew Owen felt like kind of relieved he was dead also. But then immediate guilt for feeling that. And genuinely just, I miss him. And I was just so like trying to not say anything most of the time because I didn't want to like fuck up his grieving process. And I just tried to be there, which I think is ultimately like the best way you can go. But, you know, it's really hard to know as the person directly related and one of the people who knows the damage that was done to determine how you should react to things. Ashleigh says, I always think about how in another timeline she could have been my auntie. Her mum dumped her with my granny at a few hours old and only took her back years later when they found out my grandparents were going to officially adopt. Oh, that is low. They just saw she was getting adopted and were like, never mind, we want her back? Wow. That is fucked up. I'm sorry, like Owen having been basically adopted by his grandparents, if his parents had demanded him back, oh my God. His life would have gone in a completely different direction. You guys don't even know. We're talking the difference between like basically being allowed to roam the countryside starving and half naked versus getting his like college paid for and like I can't even imagine. That's blowing my mind. I'm so sorry, Ashleigh. Yeah. Really, really shitty hand. You are correct. Ugh, the poor thing. So yeah, like, and that's a perfect like segue into, because there's also the aspect of like how much of what somebody has put you through is their own fault and how much of it is them doing the best they can with the fucking circumstances that they wound up in. And it's, we get to see both sides of this with Sean and Maeve. Sean, who is supposed to have the flowers that they're picking up, and fails to respond to Maeve all morning. He shows up late and insists on saying some words and tells everybody some of the dirty laundry, so to speak, about what their mother was really like. And the fact that they would play like football in the dark, where she kicked them out of the trailer in the middle of the night so that she could get high and fuck some guy named Greg. Or hunt the ciggy, where you would like go out and find a cigarette that still had enough on the end left for her to smoke because they had no money to buy them. And it's these really terrible stories. And the thing is, what he's saying and what Maeve says about the things that her mother did that she remembers fondly, neither of them is not telling the truth. They're both telling the truth. but they're both handling this pain in really, really different ways. And I don't think I really want to be honest, other than the way he attacks Maeve, there's how to say this, because I want to say there's nothing wrong with what Sean, like how he handles it. I don't think that's true. He's saddling Maeve with absolutely everything involving planning this funeral and is not showing up for her. So in that respect, I do think he's flat out wrong. But in terms of going up and choosing to say all the bad shit about his mom, would a lot of people handle it that way? No. Would plenty of people think it was in bad taste to speak ill of the dead? Yes. Does that make it wrong that he is harboring such resentment towards a parent who was not there for him? No. All of the things that he's sharing are his experience, and he has every right. But it's just the way that Maeve is choosing to remember her is what's more acceptable to a lot of people. And some would say kinder. Is it also kind of dishonest? Maybe. It depends on like the vibe you're bringing to it, you know? I don't think she's being dishonest because she goes up there and says everything he said was true, but you know, that wasn't all she was. So I think her approach is the healthiest, but I understand where he's coming from. And I think that everybody who has had a parent like this has both a Maeve and Sean inside them when they're trying to deal with a death. You've got to figure out which one you're going to sort of go with. And you guys, I don't know if any of you have been to a funeral where people are getting called out like for the way that they were when they were alive, or like dirty laundries being aired, but I have, and it was really so uncomfortable. But anyway, so he like takes off, and Maeve, well, she kicks him out, really. She tells him to leave, and she follows him outside, and he basically yells at her for like having her shit together at all. And it was so unfair, because it would be one thing if their mom had been a complete junkie while he was growing up, but then got her shit together and took care of Maeve once Maeve was like a teenager. And so Maeve had an entirely different experience. She didn't. Maeve was having to like pay rent while she was going to school as a fucking child. You know, she was having to like keep her own life going far younger than she should have been expected to. So for Sean to act like Maeve got given some kind of like out, she earned this place at this like, you know, program that she's attending because she stayed in school and stayed on track, which you also could have done, dude. Like, I don't know how different their situations were growing up with her mom, but it seems like they pretty much had the same experience. And he is throwing this in Maeve's face, accusing her of like abandoning him and forgetting about him. Like that's got anything to do with her. That is your shit to bear, sir. And it sounds to me like you are feeling angry at yourself and you don't know how to deal with that because you're seeing the way your mother ended up and you're seeing the fact that that's in your future because you're using. And instead of looking at how maybe you should get help and find a way to stay sober, you're just like expecting your sister to what? Drop everything in her life and get high with you and ruin her life. Will that make you feel better? Is that what you want? Really? So that whole scene, it was rough. I really hated this. Like, it makes sense because this does happen. Resentments about the, like, difference in circumstances between siblings come out at a funeral. Whether or not it's due to favoritism or circumstance or whatever, that shit will begin to come out. So this felt really true. But it was just so unfair. And Maeve is in this, like, fucked up headspace where she can't even really defend herself the way she normally would. I think that she's just so emotionally overwhelmed, and defending herself isn't even really like on her mind. It's not the first thing she is leaping to. She's wondering why are you ruining this day where we're supposed to say goodbye to her? And he, like, that's not even really on his radar anymore. That's over. Now it's about Maeve and the fact that she's, like, doing too well. And, you know, I'm sure that Maeve felt a way about the fact that she was gone, and so she had to fly home and then didn't get there in time. And sure, that could be thrown in her face, but he doesn't say that. He doesn't need, like, he also didn't see their mother until after she was dead. So I don't know. I hate the fact that it seems like she's thinking about staying instead of going back, because it's not just her own fears, but the way that her brother spoke to her seems like it sank in, and I'm super bummed over it. Oh my God, I'm out of time, you guys. I'm so sorry. I'm trying to think who else to deal with this episode, because we've got all these. Jean finds out that her sister's been seeing this guy, and basically her sister immediately is like, yeah, I'm not going to see him anymore. But Jesus, I wonder if she really isn't going to see him anymore. We'll see about that. We have Adam, who it does seem like Horse Girl is a little bit into him, but he isn't feeling comfortable telling her that he's bi. So when she assumes the partner he was talking about, the ex, was a girl, he doesn't correct her. And he has this beautiful scene later with Eric where he's like, I really miss having you in my life. I really loved this, you guys. It felt like the kind of thing that happens when when you're at a funeral and you think about how short life is, and you're like, you know what? This person means something to me. And I hope that they're able to repair things, not necessarily be a couple, but just, you know, be in each other's lives. But then he does come back to his dad, who he doesn't walk in on them, but almost, his mom is there, and they've been fucking, and they were trying to hide it from him, and yeah, he's not super happy about that. And I, like, really love the fact that he goes to the stables and, like, connects with a horse to try and sort of lift his spirits and make himself feel better. Also, he's doing well enough that she offers that he can teach a class on his own, which is amazing. I'm just really hoping things turn better for Adam, because he has been through it. And, oh, Ashleigh, yeah, Cal's struggling. Cal has, like, a hookup in the bathroom with Aisha. And Aisha is fingering them. And she puts her hand up on the wall, and there's a smear of blood because Cal got their period. And it took me a second to understand. I thought at first it was just, like, the overall embarrassment. Because, you know, even if you know that having your period is nothing to be ashamed of, there is a stigma associated with it. And sometimes you could just be like, that is so embarrassing. Oh my God. But I then realized it was about body dysmorphia, and that Cal is crying because they are, like, thinking that the testosterone they've been taking is, like, moving them away from having this female body that they don't want to have, that they don't feel at home in. And they really thought, sweet, I'm doing this thing, no periods, that's one thing I can check off the list. And lo and behold, here it fucking comes, and they're just reminded again that you live in a body that you don't like. And that was rough. And Cal's mom tries to sort of talk to them, and you can see that she really is trying, but doesn't know what to say. And so she winds up calling into the radio show, and they have a really nice, like, look, if you haven't had a great moment with your kid when they came out to you, you have to repair that. There's going to be some trust issues there, and you have to earn their trust back. And it's, like, great advice. But who should happen to be listening but Ruby? And this bitch does the thing that I wanted so bad and releases the video of O. Now, I don't know what happens in response to this. The woman in the booth is watching the video and gets a real sort of oh shit face. So she seems to think it's pretty terrible. I personally really think it's terrible, not just that O did this, but that she has never come clean to Ruby's face and been like, I'm sorry. She's still pretending she doesn't know who Ruby is. Like, that is really, really low. So as far as I'm concerned, anybody who tries to say, well, we all do things we're not proud of as kids. Yeah, as kids. The question is, can you own up to that as an adult, that what you did wasn't cool? And if you can't, then you still suck the way that you sucked then. Sorry, I don't make the rules. That's just truth. If you can't cop to mistakes in your past and apologize for them, you haven't grown, and you're not sorry, and you're not a better person now. So I'm really curious how many people are going to react to, in a very visceral sort of way, like Otis is hoping for, and the way that they did to her accusations of him being a meninist. I wonder how many people are going to be like, well, look at how young she was when she did this. Like, we can't hold this against her now, because there'll be plenty of people on the internet saying, like, a tweet that's 7 years old, if you dig that up and use it to cancel somebody, then that's totally unfair. You know, I can understand that perspective at times, but frequently people, like I said, don't take responsibility, and that's the real crux of the issue. So I'm extremely excited about finding out what happens in response to that. And I'll just say for the record, the way that O shows up at Otis's house is so gross. It's so gross. She's just taking it upon herself. It doesn't seem like she was told to go to Jean's house. She's just like coaching her with no prompting. And she finds the fucking manuscript about Otis on Jean's desk. And I'm like, what is she going to do with this? Because she reads like the first page of it, it seems like. And I am concerned that she is going to try and like use this against him somehow. If she does, it'll look bad for her. And I think she has to know that. So I don't think she will. But the fact that she saw it and was reading it, I was just sort of like, oh God, I don't like this. And like I said, just the whole attitude that she has coming to his house. She's so smug. She's so cavalier about everything. And he says to her, like, you told lies about me in front of the school. And she says, I didn't lie. And I'm like, okay, I get that technically you didn't lie, but you know, that was like the most specious fucking argument. Get out of here. Anyway, I think those are pretty much the big ones. I apologize if I remember late. Oh my God, I'm over time, but I still got to say this. Jackson is having crazy panic attacks at the funeral. He's seeing things. This is to me a little bit like worrying. That's beyond panic attack. When you start to straight up have hallucinations, I feel like we're in a different place now and he really needs some extra help. But he runs outside and Viv follows to make sure he's okay. And her creepy fucking boyfriend, first of all, comes out to check on her. Like he thinks she and Jackson are going to be making out during a funeral. And then when Jackson's like, he's intense, she gets really defensive. And I have to say, I think she's getting defensive because she knows he's right. I think there's a part of her that can see those red flags, and she doesn't like that he's pointing them out because she has learned to not look at them. And because that's, but she says something like, why are you getting jealous? And I was like, oh, wow, he got in your head like that? Now you're accusing Jackson of being jealous because of shit Bo said, which he just pulled out of his ass? Like, okay. And when Jackson goes inside, sure enough, he spots Bo going through Viv's purse and scrolling her phone. Because he is a bad, bad person. And he is not somebody she needs as a partner. I am worried about her, straight up. Okay, I have to wrap now. I'm so over time. But thank you guys so much for hanging out with me. This was a fun episode to talk about, even though I didn't like the episode. And I'm hoping next time it'll do better. Thank you again, and toodaloo, motherfuckers.
was an Unspoiled Network podcast.